What are Fatherly Arlecchino's biggest pros and cons? That's what I'm here to tell you today. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. Okay, so, the thing is with Arlecchino is that her pros haven't really changed since her last banner. She still generally features the same set of pros that she did as last time in my opinion, those being that she's a very strong pyro DPS, she's very versatile when it comes to her team options. It's really convenient that she's able to use 4-piece gladiators when you consider that that set is commonly available for clearing bosses and whatnot, so you're naturally going to build up some good pieces on that set over time, therefore she's quite resin efficient, especially if you're just starting out. She's very easy to play on the whole and has strong constellations. There's genuinely not much to add when it comes to what new pros she's acquired, because she's generally stayed as quite a consistent unit ever since her release. I will say that one thing that did change for her is that she ended up being really strong in melt teams whenever Sit Lolly released, as Sit Lolly ended up being the new best in slot for most pyro DPSs whenever she first came out. So she's still a good character, and if you're interested in Arlecchino specifically, then don't worry, she is still going to be a strong DPS and you're still easily going to be able to clear with her. Her damage is not lackluster whatsoever, and you're still going to feel that she's a good character. The point that I want to put across in this video isn't so much that Arlecchino got worse, it's more just that she's quite outscaled now, and I personally think that from a meta perspective, there isn't really much point in investing into her right now. Like I said, if you really like Arlecchino in particular, she is still a strong character, you're not going to feel like she's weak. However, there are better options these days. Even whenever Arla first came out, there was always Linny as a really strong pyro DPS option, especially in Farina vape teams. So it's not like she never had competition, she did, however, now it's a lot harder to justify going for her in particular. Like I said, her pros fundamentally haven't changed. What I said at the start there are basically her main set of pros, and I don't really think they're gonna change for a while. She is strong, she's easy to use, and that isn't changing anytime soon. However, the thing is, it is just a lot more efficient to get Moika instead. I'm sorry, but that is just the case. Now, before I fully go into that, I will say one more thing. Is there a situation in which you should pull for Arlecchino? Would there be any scenario in which getting her in particular will be the most efficient bet for your account? I would say that if you're starting out, she's not necessarily a bad DPS to get. Because while you are going to want to pull for Sit Lolly eventually if you want her best in slot team, and she is going to be a strong pyro DPS, yes, that is indeed true. And you may also be a fan of the fact that she doesn't really require any really hyper-specific 5-star character in order to capitalize on her own mechanics. Her Bond of Life thing is very self-contained. She has nothing to do with Night Soul mechanics, so you don't really have to worry about that, and she also doesn't really require any specific 5-star teammate in order to feel like her kit functions. So basically not a Skirk and Escoffier situation. However, I think that if you don't already have Arlecchino's teammates, she's just not really worth investing in, because it's just going to be more worth investing into A, either new nodkrai DPSs, or B, Moika, if you want the strongest possible pyro DPS. Now, I will add, if you do happen to have the likes of Sit Lolly and Shieldman and whatnot, and you do have the tools to form Arlecchino's best in slot team, she's definitely going to feel pretty good, she's going to be a really good pyro DPS on your account, and if you have no interest in pulling for Moika, then she's still going to feel very competitive. Because here's the thing, Arlecchino is still a really strong character, and I don't want to make it sound like she's weak. She's still better than a majority of the older DPSs. It's just harder to justify her when a very certain motorcycle user exists, but we'll touch on that soon. So, is there any circumstance in which getting Arlecchino is actually worth it? Yes, I would say that if you already have Sit Lolly and Shieldman and you don't already have a strong pyro DPS, then she's worth getting. She's gonna fill that role for you and you're not gonna have to pull for another pyro DPS. Or if you just have a strong setup for her in general, she's gonna feel worth your time. However, I would say that if you're starting from nothing and you're a newer player, just start investing into the nodkrai stuff, it's gonna be stronger at a baseline, and not only that, Moika is still the best DPS in the game, and also the best pyro DPS in the game. Now, I think it's finally time to talk about why I just don't really think she's worth investing into anymore. Now, like I said, she's obviously going to be stronger than the majority of the characters on the Chronicled Wish banner, for example. She is still better than a large majority of DPSs in this game. However, when compared to what's coming out currently, she's below that. And I would think that it's just better to invest into those newer characters as opposed to her. Not only that, but if we're looking at pyro DPSs in particular, because obviously the new DPSs are going to be the strongest ones, fine, but we need to look at specific niches here, that's going to be more useful. You would rather just get Moika. The thing is, whenever there's elemental crossover between two DPSs on your account, they're gonna need to be able to set themselves apart through their unique qualities and hopefully not steal each other's teammates. If they don't steal each other's teammates, well then there you go, they're easily able to coexist on one account. For example, if you have a really highly invested Xiao, and you also have a highly invested Chaska, just because they're both Animo doesn't mean that you're just not going to use them in the same Abyss ever. They're still going to be usable because they use totally different teammates for the most part, assuming that you have access to most of their good teammates. However, considering how Abyss is now asking for you to use more and more specific types of teams and more specific archetypes, it's rare that you're ever going to run into a situation where you're going to want two of the same element on both Abyss halves. For example, the current 12-3-1 boss really wants you to use Dendro on it. Simply sticking the Hida onto the end of my team ended up making that boss a whole lot easier to deal with. And all this leads me on to what I'm about to say next. She basically shares the exact same teammates as Moika. Yes, you can indeed put Moika in her own team, and then put Arla in an overload team, or some other type of team. There are ways in which you can make them play in separate teams. However, more often than not, you're never going to run into a situation where you want two Pyro DPSs. Most of the time, one side is really going to favor one type of team, and you are able to make slight adjustments like what I mentioned, in order to try better fit that respective chamber's requirements. But all things considered, once you get Moika, you're just not going to need another Pyro DPS. And I personally think that because of how many Pyro DPSs Hoya released in the span of a year, we're probably just not going to see another one after Moika for quite a long time, because we just don't need another one for a hot minute. I can see us maybe getting more supports or sub DPSs or something along those lines, but I don't really think we're going to be getting more main DPSs for quite a hot minute. So because of that, investing into Moika kind of just gives you all you need in that department. The thing is, like I said, Arlecchino's pros are basically the same as they were before. She is still a strong unit inherently, and if you're interested in Arlecchino, then you don't need to have any reservations about this. Yes, she is still a good DPS, and her best assault team is still competitive. Obviously invest into who you like. Yes, she is still a good character to invest into if you just want Arlecchino to work in particular, but if you want the strongest possible Pyro DPS, well, the strongest possible Pyro DPS is literally the best DPS in the game. Now, I don't know when Moika is going to get a rerun again, and that's something else that really comes into question here. Are you willing to wait for Moika, or do you just really want a Pyro DPS now? I would say that if you really want a Pyro DPS this instant, then yeah, she is still good to get, but then you have to wait for a Sitlali rerun, a Shilonen rerun, the works. In fairness, she does have other team options, so if you generally just have good teammates for Arla, she is going to work for you and she is going to be strong. But I personally just don't really want to encourage pulling for her whenever there is just clearly a stronger option available of the same element that uses basically the same teammates and is stronger high Primogem based investment. A C2 Moika is going to mow this game down for ages to come. So will a C2 Arlecchino, but you're getting more out of a C2 Moika. And once again, if you just don't want to play Moika, that is completely fine. You don't have to, and Arla's going to be a strong choice for you. Very good Pyro DPS. But I am just trying to say that if you're looking at this from an objective point of view, you don't really need Arla anymore, man. It's odd because she's such a good DPS. Like, she's really not bad. She's in a strange position where she's really strong. It's just not worth getting her because we already have a stronger Pyro DPS that exists. That is literally it. Moika is kind of diminishing her existence. I would generally just focus on investing into the nodkrai characters because they have ended up being really strong so far. Flynn's is really good, Nafer is really good, both of them are fantastic. And while I do think that an Arlecchino in her best install team is likely competitive with a free-to-play Flynn's and a free-to-play Nafer and whatnot, give those new characters any semblance of high Primogem based investment and they are definitely going to be clearing Arla. So, is Arlecchino a bad character? Not by any means, and I might have sounded harsh in this video, but I'm not trying to say that she's bad, because like I said, her pros are basically the same. They just haven't changed. She is fundamentally still the same unit that she was since her last rerun. That doesn't necessarily mean that she's bad, but she is still outclassed right now, and you could be putting your Primogems towards far better investments. She is not a bad first DPS pull if you really want her in particular. I don't think that she is a bad character by any stretch of the imagination. However, if you were to ask me, is she worth getting right now? Not really whenever you already have other characters on the horizon that are likely stronger. And obviously, it's gonna be case by case. If you're already at C1 R1, then yeah, getting the C2 is obviously gonna be a good decision for you. If you have her best installed team and you're not really interested in waiting for Moika, or you just don't want that character in general, then yeah, she's gonna be a good pickup for you. All around, there are very many situations where she's gonna be good for you to get, but for the most part, it is more efficient to just go for someone else and just miss out on this banner. I would say take this time to save. I'll of course be making a video on Zhongli as well, but all around, I think this second half is just very skippable, and it gives you a bit of breathing room to wait for whoever the next nodkrai characters are. And since we know how the nodkrai characters work by this point, you're generally going to want to pull for the sub DPS or the support or whoever before you get the main DPS. We saw it with Skirk and Escoffier, granted that was a very extreme situation. We saw it with Inefa and Flins. We saw it with Lauma and Nafer. We know how the cookie crumbles at this point. This seems to be how it is going forward. So honestly, just take the saving time and get a stronger team on the whole. You'll be happy with your investment in the end. And once again, if you're just a big Arla simp, yes, she is still a good character, and yes, you can very much make use out of her, but from an objective point of view, I don't recommend her anymore. Hopefully this video is able to tell you Arlecchino's biggest pros and cons. This has been Juice, signing out, and she'll always be cool, even if she's fallen off a bit.